Good to see you all here this morning. I think we've got a good panel for you today. The governor told you yesterday biomass is one more leg under the table of our energy future. And a key component to that energy future is the skilled workforce that we'll need to supply the workforce in that area. Just to set the parameters for our panel today, let's talk a little bit about what that energy industry looks like right now. A recent workforce assessment of the energy industry done by the Department of Labor's Research and Analysis Division, they published it last month, told us that there are 173 occupations that currently employ 9,800 workers at an average annual salary of $67,000 a year, as opposed to the annual average Montana salary of about $32,000. However, those 173 occupations that currently employ those 9,800 workers does not include biofuel production jobs. And that's largely because of the low payroll employment in biofuel industry to date. However, over the last day and a half, we have had a number of panelists discuss with you a number of bioenergy sectors where work is being done and where jobs are being created in bioenergy assessment, active forest management, biomass collection and processing, conversion technology, nonprofit coalition and communication development, and public research and development. Today's panel is going to discuss the future of energy education and workforce training in these sectors and other emerging biofuel sector industry components. And our first presenter is Brad Eldredge, who is the Director of the Institutional Research for the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education, Montana University System. Brad also manages the state's Carl Perkins Grant, which provides federal dollars to support career and technical education at the K-12 and college levels. Brad?
Thanks, Pat. Let me see if I can get this the right distance from myself. Thanks for having me today. I'm not an energy or bioenergy expert. I'm a workforce development guy. So I'm still trying to figure out why biomass is less sexy than solar. So if anybody, they're both pretty appealing to me, I guess. So if anybody wants to fill me in later. There's a lot of interest right now in the education community and the workforce development community on green jobs. And I know that this idea of green jobs is sexy right now. I just attended last month a conference in Washington, D.C. where my counterparts who also manage career and technical education programs throughout the country got together, and we talked a lot about green jobs. And one of the big questions was, what is a green job? Because we want to train people for green jobs, but we're just not sure what they are yet. And as we've thought about this a little bit more, what's becoming apparent to me anyway is that a lot of green jobs are just regular jobs with a green component. For example, a heavy logging equipment operator who's extracting logs for sawmills isn't a green job, but if he's hauling or extracting material for biomass, that would be a green job. Or a truck driver who's hauling bioenergy feedstock to a processing plant, that would be a green job. Or a power plant technician who works in a bioenergy plant rather than a traditional coal-fired plant, that would be a green job. And so what we found in the university system is that we can take a lot of our existing programs, and if they have a green or an alternative energy component to them, we can add that to the program, and that actually increases the value of our graduates on the labor market. So for example, we have a program in Billings where our automotive technology program, we've added a big component to that program on hybrid vehicles and how you service hybrid vehicles. And because hybrid vehicles are becoming so prevalent and so important, that increases the value of our graduates when they get out and actually look for a job, which is one of the main goals we have for our graduates, is that they're employable. So I guess one thing that I'd encourage those of you in the industry and those of you who are interested in this workforce development for your industry to do is to get in touch with your local campuses in the university system or with our office, and let us know what the new components to these jobs are that we need to be teaching our students in order for them to work in your industry as opposed to a traditional energy industry. I think that our campuses are very eager to add new programs for our graduates if the jobs are there. And in the past, I think both in the university system and just in general, there's been some reluctance to go in with both feet into some of these green areas because the economics was kind of iffy. A lot of the areas were subsidized by the government, and if those subsidies went away based on a political decision, then suddenly the industry was in trouble. We're very encouraged, or I don't know if I can say we, but I'm encouraged by the current administration moving towards like a cap and trade program, because I think it's going to make a lot of the traditional energy more expensive, rightly so, based on the CO2 that's being emitted, and will make the economics for a lot of the alternative energies, including bioenergy, a lot more feasible and long-term and sustainable. And that will encourage our universities and campuses to add programs that we don't have right now in alternative energy. We're already starting to. We have an energy technology program that is an Associate of Applied Science degree that was partly, I don't know if it's partly or totally funded by Wired, which Adam Dion's going to talk about here in a minute. We have a biofuels program, an Associate of Science degree in biofuels at Miles City Community College. So we're starting to do that. We're soon to have a new wind technology program at our Great Falls College of Technology. So as the economics gets better for these alternative energies, our campuses and the interest from students gets higher. Our campuses are adding programs. And our Board of Regents is also very good when there's a workforce need. We've got policies in place that allow us to kind of fast track the approval of new programs. So we want to be responsive to these new industries as they emerge. One of the things that we've done, we did it last fall for the first time, is we set up a new website that we're calling our Green Campus. There's a lot of interest both in the public policy arena and from our students in being green and in alternative energy. And so we set up a website called Montana's Green Campus. It's mtgreen.mus.edu. I encourage you to visit. It's pretty slick. And what it is it's a clearinghouse. Well, it serves two purposes. One is to showcase the online degree programs and online courses that we have in the university system, because it allows students to take courses from anywhere and thus be green. They don't have to move or drive to our campuses. But the second thing it does is it features all of our degree programs in environmental programs, energy programs, and alternative energy programs. So if you go there, you can see what we have to offer. Part of the work that we did in setting up the Green Campus, and we worked very closely with Pat Wise, actually. Maybe that's why I got stuck here today. But we worked very closely with the governor's office and with the Department of Labor in trying to determine what occupations are important in the various industries that we were interested in. And we actually looked at biomass, and maybe one of the benefits of this conference is you guys could tell us if we got it right. We used a lot of national sources, but some of the occupations that came up as important in biomass were chemical engineers, chemists, chemical equipment operators, chemical technicians, mixing and blending machine operators, industrial truck drivers, farm product purchasers, agricultural and forestry supervisors, and agricultural inspectors. And so a student or someone who's interested in becoming a student can go to that website, click on a link that says careers in energy, and then click on the biomass industry, and that's the list that comes up. And then from there they can go back to the other side of our website and look at the programs we have in those areas that are available on our different campuses. We also have a section on there that features the ethanol industry. And again, some of the occupations that come up are chemical equipment operators. Some of these are really long titles, so I won't read them because they're from the feds, but basically machine operators, industrial machinery mechanics, maintenance and repair workers, laborers and freight, stock and material movers, chemical technicians, etc. And obviously there's an agriculture component to that as well. So as I said, as the economics gets better and better and the demand gets higher from our students and from industry, I don't see why we would do anything but add more of these kind of programs. And again, tweak the programs we already have in some of these traditional occupations and add the curriculum necessary to train people for the new and emerging industries in those traditional programs. So I'd encourage you again, mtgreen.mus.edu to check that out. And then the last thing that Pat wanted me to cover, and I think I'm going to not take all my time because you haven't held up any of those cards yet, but the last thing Pat wanted me to cover was a program that we have in Montana we're calling it our Big Sky Pathways. And this is a program to encourage young people to make informed career choices as they are starting high school and working their way through high school and into our university system. There's actually a requirement in the federal law that funds some of our career and technical education in Montana. There's a requirement that we develop programs of study, which are sequences of courses that bridge high school and college and allow students to have a plan that goes from 9th grade to at least 14th grade. Or some other type of post-secondary training. So it could be 9th grade to an apprenticeship or the military. But the idea is we want students in high school, early in high school, not to necessarily pick exactly what they want to be when they grow up, but to have an idea of what general area they would like to go into when they grow up and have a plan. And we've found in states that really implement this well that their dropout rates go down because students realize the relevancy of what they're learning in school. There's not this, why do I have to know this? Or, they know they need to know it beyond just because it's on the test. They know it's going to help them in a future career. So we're implementing that in Montana. And we're also including in that, we're trying to increase the number of dual enrollment and dual credit opportunities for high school students, which will allow them to if they're ready, to take some college classes in high school and shorten the time that they have to spend in post-secondary, if that makes sense in the context of their plan. And one of the keys to implementing this plan in Montana, these Big Sky Pathways, is a system called the Montana Career Information System. It's put out by the Department of Labor and funded by the Student Assistance Foundation. And the Montana Career Information System allows students to go in and do career exploration, find out what their interests are, and maybe their interests are in green or in bioenergy, and their interest inventory will show them the kinds of occupations that would be a good fit based on what they're interested in, and also based on the kind of lifestyle they want to have when they graduate. There's a neat feature called Reality Check, which shows how much you need to make based on the lifestyle you want to have. But the whole idea behind this, and then as after they go through that, then they can make an electronic individual education plan, which is this 9 through college plan that shows what they need to take, and then they have a plan that they can follow throughout high school based on their career interests. And the neat thing about it is that we want students to have all the options in front of them. I don't know about you, but when I was in high school, I thought I could be an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor or something in business. That's all I knew about. And I went to a 4-year school, and that worked for me. I'm glad I did. But we want kids who for whatever reason 4-year is not the best option for them to know they have a lot of options, to know that there's things like windmill technicians, wind power technicians out there, and to have all their options in front of them so that they can make informed choices. So that's what we're doing in the university system, and I guess I'll turn it over to the next panelist.
Thank you, Brad. And particularly, I'd like you to think about two components of what Brad talked briefly about with us. One is, how do we inform young kids early enough in their career choices that biomass is a potential career choice for them? And the Pathways program, I think, is a viable training program for that piece. And also, as adults, if we're thinking about going into biomass and we want to take a few of those extra classes, I think the flexibility aspect that Brad emphasized in our university system is becoming more and more a reality as we look at adults who are really needing to take a class or two, get back into the system online or distance, or maybe take a block course somewhere to pick up a couple of classes. So really the university system is a good public partner in providing education and workforce development for you in the biomass industry. Our next speaker is Bob Johnson, who is the political chair for the United Steelworkers International, Local 885. Bob is an active co-author of forest policy for his international, is employed at Smurfit Stone currently as the shift millwright lead man and maintenance troubleshooter. Bob?
You can turn it on now. Good morning. I'm a third-generation Montanaman. I've been in the forest products industry all my life. My father and my grandfather. In fact, my grandfather used to be the superintendent of the Stoltz Mill in Columbia Falls. Lincoln, Helena. The forest products industry is a unique place. And if you remember the history in Montana, especially in the Missoula areas and the hub of the Five Valleys, there used to be 26 mills. And then pressure was put on by the environmental groups to remove the teepee burners. So in 1979 and 1980, at that time it was the Horner Waldorf Corporation, built a biomass boiler. Smurfit Stone is the largest recycler in the state of Montana. We recycle all our chemicals, our water, and biomass. And we actually have a biomass boiler, and we generate about 17 megawatts of power. So with that introduction, if you look at this picture right here, this area, can everybody hear me? This area right here is approximately 20 acres. That is our biomass part of our plant. The building right here is a biomass boiler. Excuse me, right there. That biomass boiler is approximately 100 foot tall and it's 40 by 40 wide at the base. It has 1,500 2-inch tubes inside of it, and we burn that at about 1,800 degrees. That's at the fire bed. We have feed water that we put in here. It's specially treated water. And the reason I'm going through all this is because one of the topics that I need to discuss is the job qualifications for this. So I want you to understand exactly what the people that are going to be running this thing and maintaining this thing need to know. Okay, because this boiler runs at 1,800 degrees, it's under high pressure. We create 600 pounds per square inch steam in this boiler. That boiler steam is going to drive 11 turbines. 5 of those turbines actually generate power. Okay, the other ones, they drive other things, such as example as a feed water pump. This mill, we take in 250,000 tons of purchased biomass per year. And you can't see it too well in this overhead picture, but over at the far end towards the top is our chipper and hog area. We actually take round logs and we make chips out of them, and that big pile in the center is our chip pile that we produce paper out of. Because of that process, we need to have a lot of chips, and we take and process logs to make those chips because now we don't have the sawmills we used to have. When this mill was built in 1959, we took all the waste from these sawmills. And they were almost willing to give it away because they had no use for it but to burn it. So this has become a high-priced commodity as the years have gone on, totally due to the fact that there's been a reduction in the availability of the wood, and because the sawmills need that income. So it has become a high-priced commodity. And that's one of the key features, I believe, in the biomass solution, because this biomass is not cheap to get out of the woods, down to a facility, process it to where you can burn it, and do a good job of burning it, and come up with a product such as electricity when it's all said and done. So, with that said, the fuel comes in. You saw a picture, I think Mel was the gentleman who had a picture, showed a truck that was tipped up. That's how we also receive our wood. And on a normal year where we're processing year-round and the sawmills are running at competitive levels, we get about 80 trucks a day of chips and hog fuel, about 40 trucks of hog fuel alone. We take this, because the biomass, and this is something I think we also need to discuss, different woods, different materials have different BTU values. So you have to mix this BTU value in that big pile with a big dozer. It's just that simple. And you have to mix this up in such a way, because if you put, say, straight sawdust into that boiler, it's just like throwing gasoline on a fire. It immediately poofs. If you disturb the airflow in that boiler, and that boiler starts doing what we call swinging, where the airflow starts changing, you could have a catastrophe on your hand, and your $100 to $200 million boiler is going to go up in smoke. And we've had that happen in 1992. So there is a danger value here with these boilers, but more important is we have controls, and you have to have good operators to understand what the dynamics of the flows and everything that are with this boiler to make it run correctly. So with that being said, we now come to an emissions process. And I'm giving you just a light overview. You burn wood, you're going to have to clean it. You're going to have to scrub it. You're going to have to do something. We have a water scrubber, and we have dampeners within this boiler, and we basically take and size the pollutants, re-inject the largest pollutants we can back into the boiler for reburning, and we take the ash, scrub it with the gases, and what we get out in the end is just a pile of ash. And then we have to dump that ash someplace. We have a very low emission as compared to a local campfire, for example. When you put fuel into a boiler and you create that pressure, you're going to have the most complete burning process you can possibly have, simply because of the intense temperatures. And you have to remove that ash. So at the bottom of that boiler, you actually have a flat grate that travels. And the reduction is 1 to 10,000. For every revolution of a motor, a shaft about this big, that grate barely moves. It takes 8 hours for that grate to go all the way around one time. Because you're putting fuel on there, you're reducing it to ash, and then you also take the debris that comes in, your rocks, metals, things like that comes with that. And we have to dispose of all that. So you have a fly ash system and different sorting mechanisms to re-inject as much as you can to reburn this, so you have little or no pollution. The other aspect, which a lot of people don't know about a boiler, is we inject air. We have 3 large fans in this boiler, because we've all waved a piece of paper at a fire or your barbecue and you've had the flames come up. Well, the same thing, but we have fans that put out a tremendous amount of airflow. That airflow injects and increases the intensity of that flame. That flame gives us a better burn, gives us more heat, and consequently we make more steam. Excuse me. So with that general idea of how a boiler works, we're going to come to the labor aspect of this. Obviously, you're not going to be able to take a high school student, for example, give him some wrenches and tell him to go fix something. You're talking about turbines that cost $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. Precise equipment, built heavily constructed to take the steam pressures and everything that's required. The pumps are going to be machined to such a surface to produce the high temperatures and high pressures required to feed these boilers. This is not something that a backyard mechanic can do. So I've worked with the state on several occasions, and Pat can attest to this. One of the things that is a passion of mine, and forgive me if I get a little emotional, but when I started in this in 1971, there were so many sawmills, every kid knew about what an electrician was, what a mechanic was, what a pipe fitter was, because our moms and dads were in this. Now, because of the 30 years of evolution, the world trade leaving, we find that these people are no longer aware of all the options that they have. Our industrial aspect has declined simply because we don't have the industry for these people to work. So therefore, nobody's interested. The biomass industry is going to need to find people. They're going to need to be able to train these people. And I would suggest that anyone who is really considering looking at this needs to find people who really have an understanding of what they're doing, take young people and put them in an apprenticeship program and train these folks. Because at some point, old guys like me are going to disappear, and you're not going to have them. I've been doing this for over 25 years. I probably had 100 job offers in the last 10 years to leave Missoula and go somewhere else because they can't find people with my skills. Okay, so with that being said, what you're going to need to operate one of these facilities, you're going to need high and low power electricians. You're going to need people who can handle the voltages. You're going to need people who understand generators, and you're going to need people who understand the low voltage controls that monitor these boilers and control that AC/DC power. You're going to need millwrights with these tremendous skills as far as your turbines, your pumps, and the conveyor systems that take the fuel out to a pile and bring it back into the boiler. You're going to need pipe fitters who are qualified to weld at the high pressures in which these pipes are going to be used, and you're going to need them to be able to do the fittings and valves and the control assemblies that control this intense amount of steam pressure. Lastly, you're going to need heavy equipment mechanics. You're going to need heavy equipment operators. These folks don't just lay around someplace. They have to be trained, and operating this equipment on a pile that moves like these do, this pile is soft. So these operators really have to have a good feel for what they're doing with that equipment and moving this, because that weight of the machine makes that stuff underneath their feet move. It's no different than driving in sand or mud. The operators of the boiler themselves are going to have to require a first-class license. It takes 3,000 hours to earn one of those licenses, and there's not many boilers this size around anymore. So if you go to a 25 megawatt capacity, you're going to need a boiler this size. And because of that, you're going to need to find these first-class operators. There's not too many places they train them. And my suggestion is if you ever build one of these, that have your operators and your maintenance people in there when you start the construction, because they'll understand how this is all put together, which will help them visualize when they go to operate and maintain this. Excuse me. A couple of points I'd like to make out. We've heard all about the availability of wood, and it's a crucial factor. In the biomass industry, Smurfit Stone, for example, is taking all the biomass within the state of Montana. We're going as far west as Spokane, down into Idaho. We're even getting some occasionally out of Wyoming. The amount of biomass that's available for this boiler is very limited. We need to find a way, like the other gentleman said earlier in the panel, to have a consistent amount. No one is going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into one of these facilities if they can't guarantee 15 or 20 years supply. And that's the real reality of this. If you don't have that supply and a consistent supply, you're not going to convince any investor that this is going to work. A thing that I think really needs to be thought about as we move along, we look at these green job sources, and we still need to realize that we are the custodians of our forests. They're ours, all the public, and we need to take care of them. And excuse me. For that reason alone, we must find a way to keep our forest products alive, and as fickle as Mother Nature is, we need to take care of her, and we need to take care of our forests. The last thing I'd like to talk to you about is our loggers and our people who work in the woods. These folks are a special breed. You don't just hand a saw to someone and say, go cut that tree. It's one of the most dangerous occupations in the world. You're not going to find someone who can jump in the cab of his logging truck and drive it down those mountain roads. It's a skill. It's a talent. And we need to find and we need to keep these people because they're rare. And as our logging industry and everything continues to reduce, and I hope it doesn't go any lower, but we need to maintain our loggers, our logging truck drivers, and our equipment operators in those mountains, because that's a skill that is we're slowly losing it. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And just to reiterate a couple of points that Bob made. One, the steelworkers and the industry have strong, globally respected apprenticeship programs where they design training specifically for the industry that they're working in. Smurfit and the steelworkers have also worked closely on a couple of occasions with the College of Technology to design shorter-term, 2-year training for advanced technical work like instrumentation. So thank you for that presentation, Bob. Our next presenter, Beth Berlin, is the Montana representative for Climate Solutions, a Northwest nonprofit dedicated to accelerating practical and profitable solutions to global warming by galvanizing leadership, growing investment, and bridging divides. Beth was an active advocate for green jobs legislation in the last legislative session. Beth?
Hello, everybody. I'm going to back us up out of the weeds a little bit and take a little broader perspective on green jobs to give everybody an idea about how the movement got started. And please bear with me because I'm not a technology person. So we're the folks that have put on the Harvesting Clean Energy Conference. It's going to be in its 10th year this year. And the last one was held in Billings, and there was about 530 folks there, so we were lucky to have a lot of Montanans participate in that process. I'm going to give a little overview of what we're talking about with green jobs. We heard Brad talk a little bit about it. The picture that you see up in the right was a picture of some folks in Missoula that held a timber framers workshop here on an old mill site it's been a brownfield. And it was used as a demonstration project. Sorry. It was used as a demonstration project to show how we could use reclaimed wood, but also develop some skills in developing structures. Okay, I can hit that. So I'm going to go over why green jobs and how do we build them, why we should move forward in a clean energy economy, and what kind of policies do we need to encourage green jobs, training, and development? Why green jobs? Last March, we heard from our president, who's really set the stage for a lot of what we're talking about with climate policy and green jobs. We have a choice to make. We can remain one of the world's leading importers of foreign oil, or we can make the investments that would allow us to become the world's leading exporter of renewable energy. We can let climate change continue to go unchecked, or we can stop it. We can let the jobs of tomorrow be created abroad, or we can create these jobs right here in America and lay the foundation for lasting prosperity. So that's really the basis of how the green jobs movement got started. It's a collaboration of a lot of different organizations, labor, as well as environmental groups, as well as community development groups, as well as business that saw an economic advantage in this effort. The vision really was for vibrant communities to rebuild our heartland, and again, it was a broad-based collaborative effort for good-paying jobs in the clean energy economy. And Brad touched on this a little bit. One of the things that we can say is a green job for sure are career track jobs that contribute directly to enhancing the environment, improving the environment, reducing pollution. They're generally traditional skills, as Brad mentioned, where we can build on blue-collar skills, and we can move forward with those skills and build on those skills. And there has been an effort nationally through an organization called Green for All. In fact, on National Public Radio this morning, if anybody heard that, there was a gentleman named Van Jones on the radio and pretty much talked about what we're going to talk about today. He is a special advisor to the president on green jobs and is pretty much a large part of the agenda. And it was, again, to really lift people out of poverty and promote really good jobs, career jobs, that could be then fostered and it would benefit communities, and not just in urban areas, but rural areas as well. And they work on national policy to this day. So why should we as the United States move towards a clean energy economy? Well, we know for a fact, there has been some studies recently that energy efficiency policies, for example, including mass transit and so forth, create more jobs than coal, create more jobs than those that are created in the fossil fuel business. Wind energy already employs more workers than coal mining nationally. And why should we as Montana do that? Well, we've got a lot of opportunities here. Again, I'm not going to really focus on biomass because I think it's a part of the puzzle here. It's a part of what we need to be doing here in Montana, and it goes along with other things that we can be doing, namely wind and solar and so forth. And energy efficiency. We forget about energy efficiency because, again, it's not one of these real sexy things, but it's actually very good for business in terms of saving money and dollars, and good for Montanans as well. Montana is 5th in wind potential, but only 18th in use. Again, we need to step up here and take advantage of some of those opportunities we have with wind. Again, realizing that there's some constraints we have with transmission, with technology on the grid, and so forth, and battery technology. But again, we could be doing better than we are right now. We have a potential. Our latest studies show that we have a potential to create 6,000 to 11,000 jobs in Montana just in the next couple of years in bioenergy, efficiency, and clean tech. And the Recovery Act gave us a pretty good down payment in terms of incentives of what to do. We've heard a little bit about that from folks here today and yesterday about some of the things that are available for tax incentives. But it really was just a down payment, and it's a short-lived sort of incentive program that we can build on and say we want to move on from here and continue those investments in clean energy. So in summary, in terms of the green jobs training, it's really a coalition building type of movement, and I would say it needs to continue in that way. We need to involve business. We need to involve unions in that effort. We need to continue to develop those partnerships. It's not just environmental folks out there alone. It's all about figuring out what the needs are in Montana and how we move forward with those, and how we can build on existing apprentice programs and continue to build on those successes. There's a few things that are happening regionally. Oregon has wind technician programs. We've heard a little bit about what MSU and University of Montana are doing in Miles City. Idaho has the School of Energy Systems. This didn't come out very clear, but again, we put on a Harvesting Clean Energy conference every year, and we continue to use that as a resource to get out information to folks in the rural areas. And if you go onto the website, you'll see that there's different topics that talk about clean energy jobs, and radio shows and so forth that you can tap into to learn about and hear from experts in terms of what's going on out there in the field right now. So it's a great resource for you. So we talk about what kind of federal and state actions can create opportunities for clean jobs, clean tech businesses and so forth. We had the 2007 energy bill, which included a Green Jobs Act, and it really was the basis for what the stimulus dollars doled out in green jobs, which was $500 million for green jobs training. And Pat mentioned that we worked locally or at the state level on a Green Jobs Act, and what we were trying to do was tap into and take advantage of what was going on at the federal level and bring that to Montana so it could be used appropriately here. For example, we tried to put some things in there that were really geared towards dislocated workers, folks that were laid off in the timber industry and so forth, that could be put back to work and retrained, building on the skills they already have or getting into something new. And again, it's really about creating new jobs in energy efficiency, renewables, biomass, and so forth. There's a lot of opportunities, a lot of other groups that are doing things like AmeriCorps, Montana Conservation Corps, where folks are already on the ground doing some weatherization that we could be working with them, bringing them into the fold as well, and bringing them on board with other contractors that are trying to make a living at this as well. So we need to continue to promote those types of opportunities. We're looking at the broadest and the biggest type of legislation that we've ever seen in our country right now for climate and energy. And we believe that this, if done the right way, can send real clear signals for private investments in clean energy, namely a cap on carbon, but also sending signals in terms of what we do with our renewable energy here. We recently had, and I want to thank our governor for this, we had a number of bills in our state legislature this past session that would have really rolled back the progress that we made for our renewable portfolio standard. And the governor chose to veto those, and I think it was a great choice. It sends clear market signals that we want to see investments in renewable energy. There's a number of opportunities out there that you could go to on the web that talk about some real specific things we can see with in biofuels and energy efficiency and wind. One is greener pathways, and that's actually on the website under greenforall.org. Again, I want to reiterate, and it's not just the cap on carbon that we're looking at that is going to send clear market signals, but it's also other things like our national renewable energy standard that is being proposed in this new climate legislation that we all need to be supportive of if we want to be able to send those right market signals that these are the right investments to make right now. I'm going to end with some resources here, and I think all these are up on the web. There are information more on the types of opportunities that would be out there for jobs and businesses and so forth, and recent studies that were done. And so I don't have time to go over them all today, but there's some good resources out there in terms of what we're talking about in terms of green policies and renewable energy standards and carbon caps and so forth. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. And again, that emphasis on community coalition building, I don't think can be heard often enough with this group particularly. You're out every day working in your communities at a policy level development area and with the state as well to help bring new workforce and education potential to this conversation about biomass, and it needs to start in the community. So thank you, Beth, for that. Our last speaker, Adam DeYoung, is the director of the Montana Department of Labor's Workforce Innovation in Regional Economic Development, or WIRED grant. Adam also worked as an independent consultant for a small group of angel investors looking at starting a venture fund in the inland Northwest, so he has both that public and private sector perspective. Adam?
Thanks, Pat. I'm going to spare you with the PowerPoint presentation today, but I do have a handout that I'll make available after my presentation once we have a break. So if you want to grab one and get a little more information on the WIRED program, you can. Forget the WIRED acronym. It's no longer viable or useful. There's a new administration. It's not going to be called WIRED ever again. Montana's WIRED program is called MAP, or the Montana Agro-Energy Plan. It builds off of the green jobs. That wasn't necessarily our focus going in, but that is where we're at now. So MAP was really created to build the skill sets needed to grow the economy of central and eastern Montana. In order to identify which skill sets we needed to grow or target to grow that economy, we needed to identify the regional economic drivers. Those are the energy industry and the agricultural industry. Now, while those are the primary drivers right now and have been the primary drivers of the economy in central and eastern Montana, it isn't the specific focus of our program because we want to move that economy forward. So we want to take a forward-looking focus, and in doing so, the governor's office chose to target the bioenergy industry, specifically biofuels and biodiesel, which makes sense for the region, and ag value-added bioproducts. So that's where we chose to target the skill sets and build the skill sets needed for that industry. Now, this focus really capitalizes on a lot of the competitive advantages that are present in central and eastern Montana. We have the natural resources, the skill sets of the workforce in the region really match up well with this industry, and it also will help directly benefit those current economic drivers of the energy industry and the agricultural industry, because the skill sets are very closely aligned. As you heard Bob mention, a lot of those jobs that he's talking about being in demand for Smurfit Stone are the exact skill sets that are going to be needed in the energy industry as it grows in the region, also in the agricultural community, and specifically the bioenergy industry in the region. Now, in order to create, or the benefits of creating a 21st century workforce or economy in central and eastern Montana is really about revitalizing central and eastern Montana. There's been an out-migration of folks, consolidation of schools has been a real issue, and so what we're trying to do is instill a sense of prosperity back in the region, a sense of being involved in this national movement that is addressing the climate issues, the energy independence and energy security issues of the nation, which will help keep our youth in the region and attract back some of those folks that had to leave in order to make a living and support a family, and who would really love to get back to their hometown but don't have the job opportunity to do so. In order to create a 21st century economy in central and eastern Montana, the MAP initiative chose to target or was focused on creating a 21st century workforce system that would attract that industry to the region. In order to create, I guess, the question really then becomes, what is a 21st century workforce system? And that's what WIRED was created to do, was to build a 21st century workforce system. We're a Gen 1 WIRED region. We were funded about 3.5 years ago, and what we were was guinea pigs. They gave us some money. They said, go out and make this happen. We don't care how you do it. We aren't giving you a book of guidelines or restrictions. We just want to see what it looks like in your eyes for your region. A lot of folks around the nation have identified a 21st century workforce system as being one driven by regional economic drivers. It's not state boundaries, it's not county boundaries. You look at what are your economic drivers and then define your region around those economic drivers. You also look at creating a system that's adaptive and innovative, because those economic drivers change over time and you have to be able to change your workforce system in order to address those changes. And finally, the major component is cooperation and collaboration amongst the differing workforce philosophies that are out there in workforce development. I like to look at workforce development as a pipeline. It fits great with bioenergy and energy development, but it also really shows the differing philosophies of workforce development and how we make those systems cooperate and collaborate to create a 21st century workforce system. So the first component in that pipeline that gets the raw talent is the education system. And we've heard how they're addressing this push for bioenergy development. Their philosophy, you bring kids in, you give them the skill sets they need to hopefully succeed, and then you push them out the door so they get into the industry. The second philosophy is the workforce philosophy, which is giving folks more skill sets so that they can become more employable as they enter the workforce. And the final component, which really pulls workforce through the pipeline, is economic development. They're attracting the companies and the industries to the region, and that in turn pulls folks from education and from the workforce system into an industry because there are jobs. They get very focused on the job training and they enter a career path which they're able to then advance within an industry. Our program has addressed that cooperation and collaboration and bridging those different philosophies by bringing multiple partners to the table. We have partnered with the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education, as you've heard, the program at Miles City, the program at Billings we've had a hand in, the program here at University of Montana for alternative energy that's deployed to the region via the internet. We have also partnered with, obviously I'm from the Department of Labor and Industries, so the Workforce Services Division is involved in on-the-ground training of folks to get them skill sets. The Department of Commerce is a major player in our program in encouraging economic development, in helping develop training programs within industry and getting feedback from industry on what they need from economic development and from the workforce system. We also have brought on board two other players, the Department of Environmental Quality and the Department of Agriculture. And they don't tie directly into what you would consider workforce training, but they both have a major hand in the growth of the bioenergy industry in Montana. Howard Haynes and Brian Spangler have been involved in alternative energy development in the state for a number of years, have a substantial outreach component and a substantial education component of the community in the region. And if we're going to advance the bioenergy industry within the region, we have to educate the citizens within the region that this is a real opportunity. That's the same for agriculture. They're going to grow the raw inputs for much of this industry, and we have to have them involved. We have to have them create an understanding that this is an opportunity that is real and that it's not just pie in the sky type of stuff, so that they can look at rotation crops and get away from wheat and barley on occasion to add to the dynamics of growing this industry within the region. A couple of good examples of partnership that has occurred because of the WIRED program is one with the Workforce Services Division and our job centers around the state and the education community. The education community has a lot of capacity in equipment and in programs that they can bring to the table. Now, those aren't always, or typically aren't, set up in a format that benefits people who are going through the workforce system. They have families, they have bills that need to be paid, and they can't take 2 years off to go and get an associate's degree so that they can become employed. They have to look at short-term training in order to increase their skill sets and get back on the job. We have a lot of programs we can leverage with wire dollars to help them out with transportation and childcare, but we need programs to train those folks. And the education community and the workforce centers have come together and really created a beneficial partnership where they take the programs at the educational institution and they shorten them into a condensed, maybe 2-week extended program. And the colleges are getting credit for those students because they're there for enough time to get credit for those students, but those folks are actually able to get some skill sets and get out into the workforce. It also gives another entry point back into the education community because those folks have experienced some basic training and they know that there's a 2-year program that they can go back and get an associate's degree in, which will advance them in their career. The Department of Commerce, like I said, has been a great partner. Unfortunately, the bioenergy industry in Montana isn't as advanced as we would like it to be, and initially in Wired we were hoping we would be able to support some more investment through equipment and infrastructure in that industry to really help grow and spark investment in the industry. That wasn't the case because of the source of our fundings, and Department of Commerce has come to the table and identified that, and they've identified, again, capacity within the education community that really can attract investment in Montana, and that capacity through DEQ and investments through the WIRED program is up at MSU Northern in their Bioenergy Innovation and Testing Center. This is really a unique jewel in Montana and in the region as a whole in the Northwest for energy testing and an asset that can attract companies to Montana because it provides a low-cost alternative and has a really state-of-the-art equipment and on-the-ground testing. So Department of Commerce saw that value for economic development, and they were kind enough to say, okay, let's shift some funding so we can help support that center and increase capacity out of that center because we see that as a benefit to economic development in the region. Finally, the 21st Century Workforce Bureau, which stems really off of what Beth talked about with the clean jobs or green jobs legislation that happened in the state. And we were looking for a way in which we could address that, in which we can take the wired philosophy of cooperation and collaboration and institutionalize it. So the 21st Century Workforce Bureau was created at the Department of Labor and Industry to bring together apprenticeship and the SWIB and jobs for Montana graduates and some other programs like that that really can help tie education to workforce development and to economic development in the region. The skills that we have been targeting have been mentioned before, and they are green jobs. That wasn't what we set out to target in the WIRED initiative, but it is what we ended up targeting. We were really focused on bioenergy. We saw that there was not as much of a need there, but that Montana's really had the base skills needed for the energy industry. They align directly with what skill sets that workforce in central and eastern Montana possesses. There's just a gap that we need to address to help get them the added skill sets and the opportunity to get into the green jobs category. Future focus. The 21st century workforce system and what you hear a lot about today is green jobs and the green collar economy, and while I think that is where Montana needs to be at for the foreseeable future, once that industry begins growing in Montana, it's necessary that we also look at the repercussions of the growth of that industry, especially in central and eastern Montana. There's going to be a demand for increased healthcare workers as a result of a growing bioenergy industry. There's going to be a demand for increased construction workers as a result of the growth of the bioenergy industry and the housing market in the region. So a 21st century workforce program has to be adaptive to that need and understand when they need to refocus to also address those industries or those growth sectors that are going to need training. Finally, I'll just say that Montana has begun developing the bioenergy workforce. We must continue to build on this philosophy that WIRED has implemented, that the Recovery Act funds have continued to grow on, and utilize this workforce development system, which isn't sexy like biomass, to attract economic development in the region, because workforce really is one of the first questions that any industry asks about when they come to the table, or any company asks about when they come to the table. And we need to do a better job as workforce professionals, as education professionals, and as economic development professionals in selling the workforce system that we built in Montana and that we possess. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam, and I think you've done a great job of outlining the public partnership that we have at the state level, hopefully to start or to continue this conversation about growth in jobs in the biomass industry. So I think we've got a couple of minutes for questions, if we've got questions for the panel. Yes?
In comparison to other people in Sewell County, what does the average smart facility employee get paid?
The average wage,
Yeah.
I believe it's $25.31 an hour.
So probably twice what the county average is.
It's a high-paid job, yes.
Yes.
Part question and part comment. I really like the whole focus on workforce training, but be very careful how you define green. Green really is renewability to start with. So think about the renewability before you think about the green and the biomass. Lumber is actually more green than biomass for energy. It displaces far more carbon emissions. So the missing ingredient that I felt from the panel was the basics. The basics is life cycle carbon accounting. That's what you got to teach first, so that people can understand how to use these different materials for their best green values. And by the way, if you do that, you may decide that cap and trade will not even work, because trading multiple carbon pools is going to be a very difficult operation. Carbon taxes, on the other hand, are very easy to handle in the markets. So go back to the basics in that training before you too technical on the individual specifics.
Thank you. Other questions?
If we've got a couple of minutes to wrap up, I would just go ahead.
I have a question. I'm a little confused. Smurfit Stone will willingly generate biomass power, 17 megawatts of power. And yet from other speakers I heard that it's not economically feasible to generate biomass power without some state or federal incentives. What's the difference?
Maybe the best thing to do would be explain to you why we even do it. The paper making process basically requires 150 and 50-pound steam. You can't efficiently generate that kind of steam pressure. So we generate the 600-pound steam pressures, and we generate power. We drive turbines to drive machinery. We drive turbines to drive pumps. And these are all high-pressure type pumps and so forth. The reason we do that is if you generate 600-pound steam, it's more efficient operation-wise, then we reduce it down through using the turbines for the pressures we need for the rest of our mill facility. The only reason we only generate 17 megawatts is because currently that's all the availability for power to go back onto the power grid. We purchase the power into the mill, we resupply 17 megawatts back out of the mill, and we get credit for it. There is an ample opportunity at our facility to generate more electricity. But to be very honest with you, and I don't think anybody in this room will dispute that, without the long-term availability of the biomass, the actual fuel itself, and getting it in a reasonable distance so your transportation costs aren't outlandish, you can't efficiently do it.
Thank you, and Bob, I appreciate that. I know that you're not an official spokesman for Smurfit, but you certainly know the trade, so that's great.
I've been doing this for 25 years, so.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Okay. We would encourage you to attend the breakout sessions that we've got for the rest of the conference for you. We'd love to continue this dialogue with you as well as continue the dialogue in a couple of other areas. So thank you again for your time, and thank you, panelists.
Thanks. Thank you, Pat. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex Schroeder to introduce our keynote lunch speaker.
Thank you, Tom. It is my pleasure to introduce Paul Argyropoulos from the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Paul is really the go-to guy on a lot of policies right now. I think today he's going to talk quite a bit about the renewable fuel standard and some other things that I think we've probably talked about over the last 2 days that are coming out of EPA. So just a little background, Paul is responsible for providing advice and analysis to the office director on a broad range of transportation program issues with a focus on fuels. He chaired EPA's interagency work group for the first Renewable Fuel Standard program and currently chairs the work group responsible for developing the new Renewable Fuel Standard rule required under the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. So without further ado, please welcome Paul.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm actually really happy to be out of the office. Although I think when I go back to the office, I'm going to still wish I was still here in Montana. It's been an interesting time. You guys are focusing on a lot of really important issues. Bioenergy obviously is critical for this country as we move forward. There's a lot of interesting things going on. As Alex said, my focus is really on fuels. I work in the transportation office in DC, and we're responsible for implementing fuel quality standards and automotive and engine emission standards as well. So basically anything that moves and anything that powers those things that move in some way, shape, or form, we look at those things and we control them to reduce the impact on the environment, primarily through air pollution controls. What I'm here to talk about today is fresh and hot off the presses. It's something that's been highly controversial, of significant interest. I've actually heard kind of overhearing conversations. No, I'm not a spy or anything, but heard people talking about this particular issue and actually some of the definitions that were in the Energy Independence and Security Act. And that's really where this program is falling out of. It's Section 211.0. It is a program that has been amended in the Energy Independence and Security Act, but it came out of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. So I'm going to get into some specifics on this, and I want to basically start up front with, to try and stop people from throwing food at me or anybody else. I am the messenger in this case, but I have been involved in fuels issues for close to 20 years at this point. I want to provide some reflection on the program and the interested parties, and also want to talk a little bit about the impacts up front. I'm going to give you some background on the statutory requirements and in some ways blame it on Congress, although it is our responsibility and role to take what Congress has provided and take the value out of that and then implement it. And then talk about some of the more interesting and critical and highly controversial areas, including the life cycle impacts, because this is the first program which is really implementing greenhouse gas controls in the transportation sector. And then I'll give you some other important information as well. First off, it seems from my perspective, and again, I've been working the renewable fuel standard for years now, that everybody has some level of interest in this. Whether you know it or not, eventually you will know that this particular program creates opportunities, it creates potential complications, but I think more importantly, it does have some level of impact in the areas that most people do business. And if you look at this, the top green, I mean, we in our office used to just deal with conventional crude oil. We talked about refining. We put emissions controls on refiners. We set fuel quality standards whereby they had to refine the products to be cleaner. And then the same thing with the engines. And we mirrored our processes from a systems approach to adapt new controls to new fuels to come up with the best possible control for reducing emissions out of the vehicle sector. And that's what we've done. Well, all of these other little bubbles, if you want to call them that, have really crept into the picture. Different feedstocks, not just oil. We have food feedstocks. We have feedstocks, production of fuels such as things from algae. We have feedstocks from the waste sector, and of course, you know, many other areas in the cellulosic area, as well as including the wood industry. So there are multiple interests in every aspect of one of those areas. If you start peeling it away, everybody has some level of interest in how it's impacting their particular business sector. So we've been dealing with this, and we met with hundreds and hundreds of different groups on this. Agricultural sector groups, we have a big ag office effort underway in the agency now. But the list just goes on and on. I mean, I never thought I would be meeting with pork renderers and turkey farmers and when we're talking about fuel production. So it's fascinating, and the dynamics are really interesting, and they actually really are critical. So we've really learned to be very sensitive and to try and understand the dynamics of each one of the various sectors. And I did want to, before I get into some of the details, to let people know, this particular rule, there's been a lot of uncertainty around this rule and the impacts it's going to have. But one thing for sure, our current analysis, it's a proposal, it's a draft rule right now. We still have to work through the final rule process, but our proposal is showing that there are significant greenhouse gas reductions out of this program. There's also significant energy security benefits out of this program. And then also there is definitely rural economic development opportunities. And I'll go through some of those if we have time at the end in the specifics, but I thought it's good to have a positive message up front before we get into the details and people start maybe getting a little more concerned. Okay, some of the key changes that came about in this particular program. First, it modified the existing program. It immediately increased the volumes in 2008 from 5.4 billion gallons to 9 billion gallons. That's significant. It also extended the program out to the year 2022, and it upped the volumes from 7.5 billion to 36 billion gallons, so a significant increase in the volume standards. It has some other bells and whistles and allowances for the fuel market to be able to use renewable products in other ways where they aren't actually required to for compliance purposes, but be captured for additional benefits. In some of the other areas of controversy, which we were sitting here talking about around the table, is some of the definitional requirements. There was a definition for what renewable biomass is that was not in the last rule. It was not required. If it was a renewable feedstock, it could be used for production. It didn't matter where the feedstock came from. It didn't matter what type of feedstock it was. Now it does. And I'll talk about some of the specifics of that as well. But generally speaking, these feedstocks have to come by law from lands that were already previously cultivated, actively managed, and then ultimately the feedstocks themselves have some level of restriction as well as to what the feedstock is, how much can be used for compliance purposes. There's restriction on the amount of starch that can be used, and it's primarily considering corn starch and production for ethanol, and there's a 15 billion gallon cap on that. It also has some other waiver authority. Congress knew that there's some uncertainties, there's some technology challenges. We heard people have been working on cellulosic biofuels for a long time, and there really isn't any commercial plants that are out there of any significant size. They're online, some are coming online. We're evaluating what those things are, and we actually have the flexibility to set the standard, even though Congress gave us what those standards are. And then to the extent that there's inadequate supply of domestic feedstocks or the fuels themselves, we can also make some adjustments. So this is to incentivize the biofuels industry, and it has and will continue to do so, even in rough economic times, and the level of certainty that we hopefully are going to show in this proposal is going to help provide some more certainty for investments in those areas. So what are the standards? We had one standard before, now we have 4 standards. The 4 standards are 4 categories of fuels. Total renewable fuel, which basically can be any of the biofuels as long as they comply. 15 billion gallons limit on what can come from corn starch base. And it also must meet for any new facility a 20% minimum greenhouse gas reduction over the fuel it's replacing, and I'll speak about that in a second. The advanced biofuel category has to meet a 50% reduction of the fuel it's replacing, and there's actually also a carve-out for biomass-based diesel with specifics on what can be used for production of biomass-based diesel. That also must meet a 50% requirement. And then the cellulosic category, which is 16 billion gallons by 2022, and that's a 60% reduction. Key issue here. Facilities that were already under construction or in production prior to enactment, that was December of 2007, are grandfathered. They do not have to meet a greenhouse gas reduction requirement. They don't have to do anything differently. Their volume is grandfathered. It can be used to comply with this program. We estimate that all the 15 billion gallons in the general renewable fuel category is basically grandfathered. So any of these other constraints that are applied to greenhouse gas reduction requirements really apply to new facilities and new fuels. So if you guys have been in production, you've been out there for a while, hopefully that allays some of your fears. We also have one other level of flexibility in setting the standards as it gets to greenhouse gas reductions. We can actually adjust the thresholds that Congress put forth by as much as 10% downward. And we are actually proposing to do that. So for the advanced biofuels category in this proposal, we believe that sugarcane ethanol is the only product that really gets close to complying. It's within a 10% range. It's coming out, and I'll show you all the numbers later on, at 44%. We're going to make that adjustment to accommodate that so that those fuels can be used for compliance purposes. So that's an important factor. And most of that fuel is actually going to be coming out of Brazil. This is just to show you here really quickly the big gain in volume is out of the advanced and cellulosic fuels. All the yellow part in the bottom there is basically fuels that have been grandfathered. All of the new stuff is the stuff on top. Most of that's cellulosic, and then of course there's some advanced as well. Now getting into the key areas, greenhouse gas, it was actually defined for us in the Act what we needed to do. There's a definition here. Life cycle assessment has been around for a long time. It's well known. There really aren't any single models out there to capture what we need to do as this is defined in the Act. The language here in red is the area that has been of most issue, and people are trying to change this language. We account for all the direct emissions, producing the fuels, growing the crops, and transporting the feedstocks to the biorefineries, just about anything and everything, and you'll bookend these, all the way to the end use, the consumer driving the vehicle, getting the benefits of the fuel at the end use. There are things that happen when you change where products go, if there are less exports, for instance. And actually, there was I think it was Adam had an example of something which I thought was pretty close to what we have to deal with here. If we're taking corn out of the export market and using it more for a feedstock for biofuel production, people still need to eat. That corn's going to be grown somewhere. Where it's going to be grown, what land it's going to be grown on, the type of land, the greenhouse gas profile of that type of land is all important because we have to account for this on a domestic and international basis. And I'll show you the significance of that in some slides in a few minutes. Setting the thresholds, this is not a low carbon fuel standard. This basically is evaluating these products, the greenhouse gas emissions, and we have various fuel pathways, and we looked at this in priority as really where what feedstocks are going to be used and what significant volume is going to be used for compliance of this program. So, so understanding that is important. We're comparing that to 2005 baseline petroleum, so gasoline and diesel, and an aggregate and average emissions profile. And we're doing the same thing for the petroleum sector. We're looking at the greenhouse gas emissions of actually producing so extracting the oil out of the ground, the type of crude that it is it heavy, is it light, is it coming from Canadian tar sands, is it coming from Venezuela off the coast, is it coming here domestically? We average that and apportion it and come up with a profile, and then that is our baseline which we use in order to compare these other biofuels. We've conducted a tremendous amount of analysis on this. There's no one specific model that can capture all of this, but we've used the state-of-the-art models that are available, every bit of new data that's out there, and we're projecting these things out and all efficiency gains and crop yields and things and trends. We've looked at the trends, and then we are projecting that out to the year 2022 in this evaluation. So people say, well, you can't compare this now to 2005 baseline. Well, we are, and we're actually taking advantage of all of the benefits that are going to happen or occur over the course of the next 10 to 12 years. From our modeling perspective, we have met with Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Agriculture. We've been in conversation with the European Union, State of California, taking trips to Brazil. We're going down there again. I mean, basically anybody and everybody, again, has a significant interest in this and is doing any life cycle assessment. At some point, I mean, this really is a global market. We have to account for these things. In some way, shape, or form, we have to at least consider the methodology and be on the same page. So when we go forth and apply these things, there's a level playing field approach to this. Some of the key factors that we have looked at as far as significant impacts. First of all, there's no doubt that the impacts of what happens here has a significant impact somewhere else. And I think that this morning the example that really struck me was, if you're creating all these green jobs and your economy is growing, you have roads that need to be built for the people that are moving into the area to take those jobs. You need to ramp up on the amount of energy that's going to be produced to supply energy to those homes. You have these domino effects which occur, and they occur everywhere on a regional, local, and obviously on an international level. That's the type of level of analysis that we have to do for this rulemaking. It's required of us, and it's actually the prudent thing and appropriate thing to do. But you have to understand what is happening internationally, and that's the area of level of most uncertainty. We recognize that uncertainty in our rulemaking. We've done sensitivity analysis to say, well, if the land, we're saying that a certain percentage is coming from forest, they're cutting down the Brazilian rainforest to plant soybeans to replace soy, not so much for biofuels production, but out of, let's say, the food market or the oil market that's being used internationally. It's going to come from somewhere. The type of land that's being converted is important. The greenhouse gas profile of those lands differs greatly. Okay, so that's a significant area that we have to account for. We've done all of this in our rulemaking. We've laid it out. Believe me, it is over 1,000 pages. I understand why nobody wants to read it. I didn't really want to read it either. The more I read it, the more confused I got. But we have experts that really do understand this, and I think can explain it in a level of detail which people really do understand, and that's what really we're out doing now. We're trying to make sure there's clarity in and amongst the ranks so that people know what's been done and can have more confidence in it. It may not be perfect. It's the best of anywhere in the world right now that's been done, and I think this process that we have for the public right now is going to really help enhance that, and it's also going to help the level of certainty that we have as well. Now this gets into, and this is really where the rubber meets the road. I have to use these transportation type terms. But in the analysis, and I'm going to step over here in just a second and show you. The bottom, if you look at it, the far left here is gasoline baseline. There's also a baseline for diesel over there. It's the orange and blue, so on the left of each of those columns. The next set, there's a series, is corn ethanol fuel pathways that we've evaluated. A dry mill natural gas, for instance. The 2022 best case dry mill natural gas. You could see there's benefits that we're showing that are going to be occurring efficiency-wise over the course of time, and then what the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions impacts are of these various things. And you can go across and look that there's different fuel pathways for corn ethanol, cellulosic ethanol, advanced ethanol, and diesel and biodiesel. And I'm going to step over here and use my loud voice for a second. If you look at this here, the cellulosic ethanol, you'll say, well, why is it so good at reducing greenhouse gas emissions compared to the fuels replacing it? The reason is, if you look at the green bar, this is land use issues. Indirect land use impacts associated with taking products out of the market or switching products from what those products are ultimately being used to produce. All of these green bars, if you take away this green bar, you're down here, cellulosic range. You can't count because of the type of feedstock. You have definitional requirements for this too, but really, it would be the same level of productions. But this is happening. There's no doubt that you're having greenhouse gas emissions occurring from land use changes. It's the magnitude of this which people are concerned about. All right? So these, of course, you can see, I mean, this is all for ethanol. This is what's happening when you take corn out of the market, no matter what evaluation you're using. Okay? These are results. Despite this, you're still getting, you're not meeting a 20% reduction, but again, only new facilities have to meet this reduction. But you're still seeing benefits under this scenario. And that's for both gasoline and diesel. On the far right side, if you look at waste oil, there's no land use impacts associated with waste grease. So you're not going to have the greenhouse gas emissions profile that you would have from using soy oil in order to convert it to biodiesel. Controversial, yes. Significant, yes. Still working on all of these things. One of the big pushes is to remove the indirect land use from the definitional requirement. Whether that happens or not, that's up to Congress. But this is what the evaluations are showing right now. But you're still showing benefits under this scenario. And this is the analysis, one of the primary analysis that we have. And currently, it's the analysis that we're using for compliance purposes to value those products. Moving on to this slide, this is under a different analysis assumptions. The last one was 2% discount rate over 100 years. So you're evaluating taking the benefits over 100 years, and you're discounting the emissions on the front end. Here, there's no discounting the emissions on the front end, and you're evaluating it over a shorter period of time. So you're only capturing benefits over 30 years and not 100 years. So obviously, you would probably expect to see this happening. The greenhouse gas emissions impacts, whether they're benefits still or whether they're actually increases, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see these things change. They're going to go up. They're going to be either less greenhouse gas reductions, or there actually could be greenhouse gas emissions profile that is greater than the fuel that it's replacing. We've laid this out. We've laid the other one out. We have other scenarios that are put forth in the proposal. Where we end up is going to be dependent upon what we see in the public comment process. So as you can see, this is what we've been dealing with for a long time, and I saw some shocked faces. But I think there's people that really are truly shocked should read the analysis and get into more details. Okay, a couple other real quick things, key provisions. I mentioned grandfathering, and again, what is grandfather? That gets into the level of details. Right now, we're really proposing baseline volume. So it's the capacity of that particular facility at the time that it was permitted. For instance, if it's a 100 million gallon facility, then that's what would be grandfathered. If it's 50, it would be grandfathered. We have other questions and open for comment in there, whether we should look at expansion, capacity expansion allowances, whether we should look at sunsetting the provisions. Right now it goes on indefinitely. But if you were to upgrade that facility, only the baseline volume under the current proposal would be grandfathered. Any new products, volume increases, for instance, in that facility would not be grandfathered and would have to meet one of the threshold requirements in order to qualify. The renewable biomass definition, again, this is a big area of controversy. We don't really see, and we work with USDA on this, that this is a significant issue in the U.S. Types of yield gains, the way land has been used, the fact that most land in this country has been previously cultivated at some point in time, so you should be able to use that land to produce the feedstock for compliance purposes. It doesn't prohibit you from growing other products outside the boundaries of that land and using them for food production or whatever, or even feedstock production for fuel. It's just that that feedstock couldn't be used for compliance purposes for this program. There are other restrictions as far as where the products can come from. There are restrictions on federal lands. You can't basically get biomass off federal lands. Again, these are all written into the Act and the definitions within the Act itself. So there are some restrictions. How do we verify that the feedstocks, such as corn, which is a fungible product, going to a facility, came from land that was previously cultivated? We're putting the burden on the biorefineries to have record keeping, have a contract. They generally know, the farmers generally know that the land was previously cultivated or not, and within the other restrictions. So there is no perfect system that's in place right now to do that. We don't want to go down and enforce against the farmers. We don't want to have to track farmers. We're just expecting that through some level of certification, it could be third-party certification, and some development of some more sophisticated systems that actually, at least there could be records that are already used right now. They could just say, yes, this is compliant feedstock. So there's lots of ways to do this. That is a big area that we're also having to seek comment on as well. Getting into the impacts. Again, I mentioned them up front so that people really understood them. This tells you what they are. 6.8 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. Getting a lot of benefits and greenhouse gas reductions out of this program. Petroleum consumption in 2022, when this program is fully implemented, will reduce, I think it's 11% of annual gasoline and diesel consumption. That's pretty significant, even at that point in time. And that's in a declining or fairly flat area of consumption in this country as well. The fuel costs, some modest cent per gallon in their cost. They're not priced to consumers. Pricing at the pump, many dynamics that go into how fuel's priced, but from a cost perspective, what it costs to produce and to blend these products into the fuel sector right now, for ethanol, for instance, or for gasoline, could be almost anything, not just ethanol, 2 to 10 to 11 cents a gallon, and actually in the diesel area, slight decrease to a slight increase. Energy security benefits, when we are displacing imported petroleum, we are offsetting petroleum somewhere else. So we're expecting that crude oil prices will decline. Now what happens as a result of that on the international market is, if crude goes down, other people may say, well, it's more, it's cheaper now, so we can buy it. In emerging economies, growing areas, and you look at China and the amount of cars and fuel that they're consuming right now. Depending on the economy of the world at that time, a lot of other things could happen to offset this, but we see benefits in the U.S. from an energy security perspective. And then food costs. There's been a lot of issues about food versus fuel and the debate over that, using food feedstocks for fuel instead of for food, and we actually had a big analysis that we did last year under a waiver request, which is a very long conversation. But we expect that the cost to consumers is minimal, only about $10 per person, and in actuality, you have a significant amount, over $7 billion in rural farm benefits. So those are what is a very, very intricate and complicated rule. Those are what I consider to be the high points. As far as time, I don't want to really take any more time. I have some materials on mid-level ethanol blends if you want me to make a few remarks about them or not. But I'm also happy to just maybe stop and take a few questions right now.
Why don't we take questions?
Okay.
As a former, I'm not going to like this question. As a former employee of Major Oil for 14 years, officer on active duty in the Army, where did you calculate the cost for Iraq and Afghanistan to protect that oil?
Why does everybody always have to bring that up? They're not accounted for. But neither is the subsidies and other things for the farmers and regarding not just the oil companies, but the farm. I mean, everything of that nature is really not accounted for. However, we do have an expanded energy security analysis that will be in the docket, which we're updating from our last one under the previous rule, which will talk about a lot of these things and how you would go about dealing with those issues. So I'm happy to not be able to answer that question, really.
Since you grandfathered corn and ethanol, what's the justification for the different percentages for the threshold?
Well, it's not just corn ethanol that's grandfathered. It is every facility, even in Brazil. Biodiesel facilities are all grandfathered, so their product can be used as well.
Why do you need the different percentages?
Basically, if you're going to get reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector, you need to establish those thresholds in order to be able to capture those reductions. And obviously there are other requirements there as well, which has to do with cellulosic. That's where the advanced biofuels, you're going to get a greater degree of reductions from those as well. But you can still, and we are showing reductions from the use of biofuels, whether they're grandfathered or not, under the one analysis right there.
Did I understand you right when you did the gasoline calculation, that was an average of what's the pool, if I understood you right?
Yes.
So that wasn't an analysis of, say, incremental new sources of petroleum, it was an analysis of average?
It was an analysis of the 2005 average of petroleum utilization in the U.S., and that included percentage of tar sands, percentage of Venezuelan heavy crude. I mean, basically anything, wherever we get those products from, we took the average, and that's what the emissions, and we've done the same thing for the biofuels as well.
But so if incremental sources of petroleum change, if tar sand goes up and Texas light crude goes down, do you capture that in the comparison?
Congress wrote 2005 in the law. We don't have the latitude to change that unless they change that themselves, which I expect that there may be changes coming. I don't know.
kind of taking off of that, in other words, what you're trying to tell us is the impacts from the tar sands in Canada are not going to be analyzed any differently from sources for petroleum, and yet you're looking at all these other different options for biomass.
No, the impacts are are analyzed from the Canadian process as well. So we're capturing the greenhouse gas emissions impacts from production of Canadian tar sand oils. So we look at that profile and we take that and apportion it based on the amount that's coming into this country.
And then why didn't they apportion it for the new, all the renewable stuff in one big number, so you'd have just a balance instead of 8?
Well, that's a couple things. One, feedstocks was defined and what could be used to produce. That was one thing. Establishing the specific volume categories, for instance, there is a carve-out for biomass-based diesel, and that's actually a volume standard as well. So they're carving out to create a market, a certain market for biomass-based diesel products, and a certain market for these other categories of fuels, notwithstanding the feedstocks could be different, and the products themselves, the fuels themselves, could be different, as long as they demonstrate these minimum level of reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And we have averaged over the course of the various pathways as well. So it's not, but if you register and you are using natural gas, for instance, that's one pathway. If you're using coal, then you're going to have a different profile.
Right, I understand that.
Yeah.
I just find it hard to compare the tar sands to making biodiesel out of canola or rapeseed and come up with those numbers. I just got burned out. I'm trying to go through it too.
No, it's understandable, and it's a complex issue. And again, if you look at where we've put the boundaries in the analysis, they really are drawn in the same area as far as what you're capturing from a petroleum baseline in the aggregate for these other products in the aggregate as well. So they have done that.
We heard a little bit earlier about utilizing waste streams and how that relates to scale. So I guess my question is, was scale factored into this? And then in factoring in scale, you also look at the opportunity to utilize waste streams and its life cycle carbon emissions now.
Well, when you're talking about waste streams, there's a requirement or an allowance for municipal solid waste and what portion of municipal solid waste can be used for compliance purposes, for production purposes of renewable fuel. That's one. We have waste grease, and there's other waste products that can be utilized for production of the fuels as well. From scaling them, I think you're really only looking at some point, somebody may want to come in and say, I have a facility, I'm only going to produce 50 million gallons a year, but your profile is not analyzed. How do I go about analyzing that profile? So it's a relatively small scale. Somebody wants to do that. We are looking at ways that we can evaluate that particular process technology to allow, it's a smaller scale, but to allow it to generate these credits, or these RINs as we call them, for compliance purposes.
Okay, so I guess my next question or follow-up would be that if there is someone that's interested in developing a facility that's utilizing a waste stream, and they believe that their overall carbon life cycle for that facility is going to be significantly reduced because they're utilizing the byproduct of another facility, would they have access to your simulation or your information to run that through and put that in their proposal to seek federal funds to help support development of that program?
Yeah, these models are out in the public already. We've been doing a lot of updating with data and so forth, so they're capturing these in these models as well. The integration of them is a little more complex, but to the extent that they can do that and use these for simulation, yes, they could. It still has to be verified through us for compliance purposes. And it's not to say that we couldn't just say you did everything that we would have done and we verify it. That could be a potential scenario, but generally speaking, we're going to be the ones, because we're enforcing that, the law, that would have to do that. Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody's time very much. I don't know if
Thanks very much, Paul.